There are moments in life when you don't realize the impact of something you did because, to you, it felt normal. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You weren't performing. You weren't calculating the effect your actions might have. You were just being yourself. And sometimes that's exactly the thing that changes everything for someone else. You probably don't even remember the exact moment. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't staged. It didn't feel like a turning point. Maybe it was the way you listened when they were talking about something that mattered to them. Maybe it was how you stayed calm when things felt tense. Maybe it was the way you didn't judge them when they admitted something vulnerable. Whatever it was, it landed deeper than you know. And here's the truth. Someone fell for you not because you tried to be extraordinary, but because you were consistent. There's something rare about a person who doesn't rush to fill silence with noise. You didn't interrupt them. You didn't compete for attention. You didn't try to make every moment about yourself. You let them speak. You let them exist without feeling like they had to perform. That kind of presence is uncommon. You might think it was small. They didn't. When they replay that moment in their head, it's not about what was said word for word. It's about how they felt standing in front of you, seen, heard, understood. And not in a dramatic, over-the-top way, in a steady way, the kind that feels safe. That safety is what changed everything. You didn't chase them. You didn't beg for their attention. You didn't flood their phone with constant messages demanding reassurance. You lived your life. You had your own rhythm, your own boundaries, your own dignity. And that's what made them crazy about you. Because they realized something. You weren't trying to get something from them. You weren't trying to fill a void. You weren't leaning on them for identity. You were whole on your own. That's intimidating at first, but it's also magnetic. There was a specific moment, maybe you don't remember it, when they expected you to react emotionally, maybe even dramatically. Instead, you responded with calm honesty. You didn't explode. You didn't manipulate. You didn't guilt them. You just said what you felt and let it stand there. That moment stayed with them. Because most people react from fear. You reacted from stability. And stability feels rare when someone has been surrounded by chaos. You might have thought you were being too much, or too quiet, or too independent. But from their perspective, you were grounded. And grounded people are hard to forget. They started noticing small things about you after that. The way you don't over-explain yourself. The way you don't chase validation. The way you give attention, but don't beg for it in return. The way you can pull back without turning cold. It confused them at first. They were used to emotional extremes. Used to people either clinging too tightly or disappearing completely. You did neither. You stayed present without losing yourself. And that's when it shifted from interest to something deeper. They began thinking about you during ordinary moments, not obsessively, but consistently. When something funny happened, you were the person they wanted to tell. When something stressful came up, they wondered what you would say about it. When they felt uncertain, they remembered the way you handled situations with calm clarity. It wasn't about intensity. It was about impact. You impacted them without trying. And that's dangerous in the best way, because love that grows slowly often grows stronger. You didn't try to impress them with perfection. You let them see your flaws. You admitted when you were wrong. You apologized when necessary. You stood your ground when needed. That balance is powerful. There was one specific thing you did that sealed it. You respected yourself. Maybe it was the day you decided not to argue anymore. Maybe it was the day you said, I don't want something halfway. Maybe it was the day you stopped reaching out first. You didn't do it to play games. You did it because you value your own peace. And that's when they realized they could lose you. Nothing wakes someone up faster than the thought of losing someone steady. Not someone dramatic, not someone loud, but someone stable. You weren't threatening to leave. You were simply no longer overextending yourself. That shift hit them hard, because they realized your presence wasn't guaranteed. And suddenly, everything about you felt more precious. They started replaying conversations, analyzing moments, recognizing how rare it is to find someone who doesn't manipulate love. You didn't try to control the outcome. You allowed space. And space makes feelings grow louder. You probably thought pulling back meant they would lose interest. It did the opposite. It made them aware. It made them realize how much they were used to you being there. It made them notice the quiet ways you supported them. It made them see that you were never chaotic. You were calming. And calming is addictive when someone's life has been noisy. They're not crazy in love in a reckless way. They're crazy in love in a thoughtful way. In a, I didn't see this coming, but now I can't unsee it way. In a, why does this person feel different from everyone else way? And the reason it happened is simple. You didn't chase. You didn't collapse. You didn't perform. You stood still in who you are. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in someone's life is refuse to bend yourself into something smaller just to keep them. That's what you did. You chose dignity over desperation. You chose calm over chaos. You chose self-respect over fear. And that choice made someone fall harder than they expected. Not because you tried to make them, but because you didn't. That's the part they didn't anticipate. You weren't trying to be unforgettable. You just were. And now, whether you realize it or not, someone is carrying the weight of that realization quietly, not loudly declaring it, not dramatically confessing it, but feeling it deeply. Because when someone encounters a person who holds their own value without demanding it from others, it changes how they see love. And you did that without even knowing. And that's only the beginning of what it awakened in them. After that shift, after the moment you chose yourself instead of overextending, something inside them became unsettled in a way they couldn't ignore. It wasn't panic. It wasn't jealousy in the dramatic sense. It was awareness. A quiet, uncomfortable awareness that you were not waiting around, that your world did not revolve around whether they called, texted, showed up, or hesitated. You had your own rhythm, and when they realized that, their feelings intensified instead of fading. At first, they tried to rationalize it. They told themselves they were just reacting to change, that maybe they simply missed the familiarity of your attention, that maybe this was ego, not emotion. But the more they sat with it, the clearer it became. This wasn't about losing convenience. It was about recognizing value. When you stopped chasing, you didn't become distant. You became clear. And clarity is powerful. You didn't send paragraphs asking for reassurance. You didn't overanalyze every shift in tone. You didn't try to force a label where there wasn't one. You simply adjusted your energy to match what was being given. That balance is rare. Most people either fight for more or disappear entirely. You did neither. You stayed grounded. You didn't punish them. You didn't beg. You didn't compete. You just stopped overgiving. And that's when they felt the difference. They started noticing how often they thought about reaching out first, not because they felt obligated, but because they wanted to. They missed your calm replies. They missed the way you didn't escalate situations unnecessarily. They missed the steadiness you brought into conversations that might have otherwise felt chaotic. You became the contrast. When they interacted with others, something felt louder, more reactive, more dramatic, and they realized how much they appreciated the way you handled things without turning everything into a storm. There was also something else that surprised them. They respected you more, not because you withdrew affection, but because you showed standards. You made it clear, without shouting it, that you value mutual effort, that you are not interested in half-presence, that you will not shrink yourself to make someone else comfortable. That realization didn't push them away. It pulled them closer. They began replaying small moments that didn't seem significant at the time. The way you laughed without trying too hard. The way you expressed disagreement calmly. The way you admitted when something hurt instead of pretending it didn't. The way you didn't make everything about winning. Those things settled in their chest quietly. And here's what really changed things. They noticed how safe they felt being honest with you. Not in a confessional, dramatic way. In a natural way. They didn't feel like they had to perform confidence around you. They didn't feel pressured to impress you constantly. They didn't feel judged for showing uncertainty. That emotional safety is addictive, but not in a reckless way, in a grounding way. They started comparing without meaning to. Not comparing you to someone specific, but comparing how they felt around you versus how they felt elsewhere. With you, they felt steady. Elsewhere, they often felt like they had to maintain an image. And maintaining an image is exhausting. The day you stopped overextending yourself was the day they realized you weren't trying to secure them. You were assessing them, quietly, watching whether they would meet you halfway. And instead of feeling pressured, they felt challenged, in a healthy way. You weren't chasing validation, you were observing consistency. That changed the dynamic entirely. They began thinking about what it would actually mean to lose you, not hypothetically, not casually, realistically. What would it feel like if your number stopped lighting up their phone? If your calm voice wasn't available during difficult days? If someone else experienced the steadiness you offered? That thought unsettled them, because suddenly, this wasn't just a connection, it was something they didn't want to mishandle. There was also something about the way you handled disappointment that left a mark. When something didn't go the way you hoped, you didn't explode. You expressed yourself clearly. You allowed space. You didn't guilt them. You didn't dramatize. You stood firm without turning cruel. That kind of emotional control speaks loudly. It signals maturity. And maturity is magnetic to someone who is tired of volatility. They also noticed how you don't broadcast your emotions for attention. You don't post cryptic messages, hoping someone will decode them. You don't use jealousy as leverage. You don't try to provoke reactions. You communicate directly. And if you're not heard, you adjust your investment accordingly. That quiet confidence started occupying more of their thoughts than they expected. It wasn't butterflies and obsession. It was respect turning into admiration, admiration turning into attachment, attachment turning into something deeper. And the reason it happened is simple but powerful. You showed them what self-respect looks like in action, not in speeches, not in ultimatums, in behavior. You didn't threaten to leave. You simply stopped giving what wasn't reciprocated, and that clarity forced them to step up internally. They began asking themselves harder questions. If this person walks away because I stay indecisive, will I regret it? If I lose someone this grounded because I wasn't clear enough, will I be able to replace that kind of presence? The answer kept coming back the same. No. They couldn't easily replace what you bring. Not the way you listen, not the way you handle pressure, not the way you value yourself. And here's something you may not know. They started adjusting their own behavior because of you. Becoming more intentional, more direct, less reactive, more accountable. Not because you demanded it, because you modeled it. They realized that being with someone like you would require them to grow. And growth is intimidating, but it's also exciting when you're ready. You didn't make them fall for you with intensity. You made them fall for you with consistency, with steadiness, with self-control. And that kind of love doesn't burn out quickly. It roots, quietly, deeply. They may not have said, "I'm crazy about you" out loud, but internally, they're no longer neutral. They're invested. Not because you chased them, because you didn't. And that difference is exactly why this feels different from anything they've experienced before. And the part that changes everything? They're starting to realize they don't want to risk losing you by staying silent anymore. But that's a step they're still building the courage to take. Something shifted in them after that realization, and it wasn't dramatic on the outside, but internally it felt like the ground had moved. They stopped treating what they felt as something casual. They stopped labeling it as just a phase or just attraction. It became something they carried more carefully, something they examined honestly instead of brushing aside. And when a person starts handling their feelings carefully, that's when you know it's no longer light. They began noticing how protective they felt over your image in their mind. When someone mentioned you, their attention sharpened. When someone misunderstood you, they felt the urge to clarify, not possessively, not aggressively, but instinctively. The kind of instinct that happens when someone matters more than you planned for. They also started noticing how your absence felt, not in a dramatic, I can't breathe way, in a subtle way. If a day passed without hearing from you, something felt slightly off. If you seemed distracted or distant, they wondered why. If you laughed a little less, they noticed. They didn't interrogate you. They didn't demand explanations, but they paid attention. That's the quiet sign of deepening love, attention without force. They found themselves replaying the way you handle yourself in moments of tension, how you don't escalate, how you don't weaponize emotions, how you can disagree without turning cold. That level of emotional control is rare, and rare things become valuable when you recognize them. They realized something important about you. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. Your influence doesn't come from dominance. It comes from stability, and stability creates trust, and trust is what changed everything. They started imagining what it would feel like to build something real with you, not in fantasy scenarios, in ordinary ones. Long days, stressful weeks, quiet weekends. They imagined you in those spaces and felt calm instead of overwhelmed. That's when it stopped being infatuation. Infatuation imagines highlights. Real love imagines normal life. And when they pictured normal life with you, it didn't feel boring. It felt safe. They also recognized something about themselves. Around you, they didn't feel like they had to perform confidence. They didn't feel pressured to dominate conversations or prove anything. They felt balanced. You made them more thoughtful, more reflective, more aware of their own reactions. That kind of emotional mirroring is powerful. You didn't try to change them. You just held yourself in a way that encouraged them to elevate naturally. There was one specific moment, you probably don't even remember it, when they were overwhelmed about something in their life. They expected you to either overreact or dismiss it. Instead, you listened. You offered perspective without controlling the situation. You didn't try to solve it for them. You just stood beside them emotionally. That moment stayed. Because support without control feels rare. They realized that your strength isn't loud, it's consistent. And consistent strength creates security. Security creates attachment. Attachment creates fear. Not toxic fear, but the kind that makes you careful with someone's heart. They started becoming more aware of how their actions might affect you. They thought twice before being vague. They reconsidered delayed replies. They questioned whether they were showing up fully or halfway. That self-awareness wasn't driven by guilt. It was driven by not wanting to lose you. And here's the part that deepened everything. They began respecting your boundaries instead of testing them. When you stepped back slightly, they didn't chase dramatically, but they noticed. They recognized that you were recalibrating your energy. And instead of trying to overpower that, they felt the weight of it. You weren't dramatic, you were disciplined. That discipline scared them a little at first, because disciplined people don't tolerate inconsistency forever. And that's when they understood something. If they wanted you, they couldn't stay passive. They couldn't hide behind ambiguity. They couldn't keep things undefined to protect themselves. You weren't going to beg. You weren't going to overextend. You weren't going to lower your standards just to maintain connection. That realization made their feelings sharper, because they knew this wasn't a situation they could keep floating. You either move towards someone like you intentionally, or you lose them quietly. And the idea of losing you didn't feel abstract anymore. It felt real. They imagined you with someone else, someone who meets your steadiness, who appreciates your boundaries, who shows up without hesitation. That image didn't make them jealous in a dramatic way. It made them serious. They began asking themselves whether they were ready to match your energy fully. Because loving someone like you requires consistency. It requires clarity. It requires courage. You don't thrive in confusion. You thrive in mutual effort. and they're starting to understand that. What makes them crazy about you isn't intensity, it's how grounded you are. It's the way you can love without losing yourself. It's the way you can step back without turning bitter. It's the way you don't need to prove your value loudly. They didn't fall because you chased them. They fell because you didn't. You let them experience your presence without pressure. And once someone experiences calm love after chaos, it's hard to go back. They are no longer neutral. They are no longer casually interested. They are emotionally invested. Not in a reckless way, in a measured, intentional, slightly terrified way. Because real love isn't loud at first, it's steady. And steady feelings are harder to shake. They're beginning to realize that if they don't speak up soon, they might lose something rare. And rare is not easily replaced. And the deeper truth? They didn't expect to feel this strongly. But now that they do, pretending they don't feels impossible. By the time they reached this point, it was no longer about whether they liked you. That question had quietly dissolved weeks ago. What they were wrestling with now was something deeper. What do I do with feelings this steady? Because intensity is easy to react to. Intensity pushes people into quick decisions, dramatic confessions, impulsive moves. But what they feel for you isn't chaotic. It's grounded. And grounded feelings require intentional action, not emotional explosions. They've started noticing how differently they think about you compared to anyone else. With others, attraction feels like a spark, quick, exciting, sometimes unpredictable. With you, it feels like gravity, constant, present, unavoidable in a quiet way. Even when they're busy, even when life distracts them, there's a steady awareness of you in the background of their mind. They catch themselves smiling at memories that aren't dramatic at all. A random joke you made, the way you tilted your head when you were thinking, the calm tone in your voice when you disagreed with them. None of these moments were grand, but they linger. And lingering is the difference between interest and attachment. They've also become more aware of how you influence their decisions. Before responding impulsively to something stressful, they think, how would this affect her? Before disappearing into their own world for days, they consider, would that create confusion? That level of consideration isn't forced. It happens naturally when someone starts mattering deeply. And here's what surprises them most. You don't feel like pressure. You feel like responsibility in the best way. Not responsibility in a heavy, suffocating sense. Responsibility in the sense that they don't want to mishandle something good. They don't want to be careless with your time, your energy, or your trust. They've also started noticing how rare your emotional discipline is. You don't overreact to small shifts. You don't create storms where there aren't any. When something bothers you, you communicate it clearly. When you need space, you take it without theatrics. That calm maturity challenges them to rise instead of retreat. And that's what's making them fall harder. Because being with someone steady requires you to be steady too. They can't hide behind confusion anymore. They can't claim they don't know what they feel. They do know. What they're figuring out now is how to step forward without ruining it. They're aware that you're not the type to tolerate mixed signals forever. You're patient, but not passive. You're understanding, but not naive. And that awareness makes them careful, not scared, careful. There have been moments recently where they almost said more than they did, where the words, "I care about you more than you think," sat at the edge of their tongue, where they almost admitted how often you cross their mind. But they pause, not because the feeling isn't real, but because they want to express it in a way that matches its weight. You deserve clarity, not rushed emotion. They've also confronted something uncomfortable. They're afraid of losing you before they fully step forward. Not because you're threatening to leave, but because you don't beg. If they hesitate too long, you'll simply adjust. You won't create chaos. You'll just choose peace. And that quiet strength makes them realize time isn't infinite. They've imagined scenarios where they stay silent and you slowly detach. They can see it happening. Your messages becoming less frequent. Your tone becoming lighter. Your energy becoming more self-contained. You wouldn't slam the door. You'd close it gently. That possibility unsettles them more than rejection ever could, because rejection is loud. Loss through inaction is quiet and permanent. They're also recognizing how your independence isn't distance, it's balance. You don't center your entire world around them. You have your own interests, your own pace, your own priorities, and instead of feeling threatened by that, they feel inspired. You don't need them to complete you. You want them to complement you. That distinction is powerful, and it's rare. They've started asking themselves a simple but serious question. Am I ready to match her level of emotional maturity? Because loving you won't be about drama or intensity. It will be about consistency, about showing up when things are boring, about communicating even when it's uncomfortable, about choosing each other daily, not just when it feels exciting. And strangely, that doesn't scare them away. It steadies them. They realize they don't want chaos anymore. They don't want the adrenaline of unpredictable connections. They want something solid, something rooted, something that grows instead of burns out. You represent that. They're not crazy in love in a reckless, overwhelming way. They're crazy in love in a thoughtful, grounded way. In a, this person fits into my real life way. In a, I don't want to lose this because of hesitation way. They've begun subtly adjusting their behavior to reflect that seriousness, being more intentional with plans, being more present in conversations, being less vague about the future. You may notice it in small ways, longer eye contact, more direct questions, more curiosity about your long-term goals. That's not random. That's investment. They're picturing you in their future now, not in a fantasy, in a realistic way. Holidays, hard days, growth, conflict resolution, shared decisions. And instead of feeling overwhelmed by that image, they feel calm. Calm is the strongest sign, because infatuation creates nerves. Attachment creates anxiety, but aligned love creates peace. And peace is what they feel when they think about building something real with you. They haven't said it out loud yet, but internally, they've already crossed the line from I like her to I don't want to lose her, and that shift is irreversible. The only thing left now is whether they'll step forward fully or risk watching something rare slip away quietly. Because someone can be crazy in love and still need courage to show it, and that courage is building inside them right now.